All right, can you guys hear me now? Can you guys hear me now? Sweet. There we go. Sorry about that. Hopefully I will be able to cut that bit off at the beginning. For some god's forsaken reason, my computer settings spontaneously decided that my microphone just was not going to get to be accessed by literally any other device. Just nothing. Like, you don't get that no more. Not for you. So, should be fixed. How's my volume? Because I tried to kind of mess with it a little bit to make sure that it wasn't turned down too far. So, sorry about the little bit of a issue. It looks like there's 35 of you that stuck around despite the problem. So, thank you guys so much for your patience. Gotta love the damn tech gremlins. I blame Ocean. Ocean was just hanging out in my server for a second, and it is absolutely his fault. So, how are you guys doing tonight? I can actually see the chat. And I'm going to start with a couple of personal stories about kind of growing up and the way that ADHD was. But I want you guys to be able to ask questions. So I'm interested to see, at least over the next few minutes, what you guys are looking for from a stream like this. Because it's going to be a lot of rambling about my experiences, to be honest. And yes, as Sam said, everybody remember to like. Also, thank you so much for the super chat. I tried to thank you at the beginning, Ikeda. It is all Ocean's fault that I am late. I got completely distracted by the chat and also was cooking food, so yay. All right, so good thing the chat's actually working this time because YouTube done screwed the pooch. Last time I did a live stream by myself with well, it was actually with Callan. Callan was a guest hanging out with me on the Stoicism wine rant. So I guess while I wait for you guys to kind of pile in and let me know what you're interested in terms of learning about experiences with ADHD and kind of how I cope and that sort of thing, that's some very basic overview of what I'm looking to talk about. I'll start with growing up, I was different, and I knew I was different. All right. Hey, guys, sorry about that. My breaker flipped and decided to shut the stream off. My apologies. I'm back. So I was saying the tech gremlins are telling me that my wiring in my house is bad, which I already knew. So yeah, what happened was the circuit breaker decided to flip, and I had to go get that fixed. So we unplugged a couple of things that were in this room as well, so that was annoying. There's still 37 of you guys, so thank you again for sticking to it. So, like I said, I'm going to start with talking a little bit about my childhood. Hopefully getting to cut out the portion where the errors happened. Also, thank you so much for your donation, Akeda. The tech gremlins are telling me that I need to rest. No, the tech gremlins are telling me that I need to fix the wiring in my house. This house was built in the 60s, and none of the floor plans at City Hall match the house that I currently own. So, yeah, the wiring in this house is terrible, and it also doesn't match. The circuit box was, like the breaker box, was replaced at some point, but that's about all I know. Like, a lot of the wiring is very, very old, and some of it might even be original to the house. So, it's kind of hit or miss whether or not it works properly at any given time. At random, my breakers will flip in the kitchen, for example, and we had to put a particular outlet in our gym on its own breaker because my office would randomly shut off power if anybody used the treadmill. So, welcome to the wiring that is my house. But coming back to the topic at hand, what you guys are here for, again, post any questions that you guys have. I will put them to the side for later in the session for the Q&A, but think about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I was different growing up, because I spent a really long time, most of my life, in fact, thinking that I was lazy and that there was just something wrong with me. And for those of you who are neurodivergent, I've been diagnosed with combined type ADHD. I wasn't diagnosed until I was somewhere between 24 and 26. I want to say it was 24, so I've known for a few years. But unlike some folks that are assigned male at birth, which I'm going to be using the terms assigned male at birth and assigned female at birth, mostly I might say men and women on occasion, but we don't know what causes the difference in presentation of symptoms between assigned male at birth and assigned female at birth folks. We don't know if it's a genetic presentation difference, if it's a hormonal thing. There's not been a lot of study into it. In fact, like assigned female at birth ADHD has only recently started to be studied. So I'm not going to say like male and female ADHD. I'm just going to talk about like birth assignment, because I don't know, for example, if trans folks experience ADHD differently than cis folks. So I'm not going to try to speculate into that, and I'm not a healthcare provider. I'm talking about my experiences and my research for this stream, and like what it was like for me growing up and what diagnosis was like, and the hell that I've gone through trying to wrangle my symptoms, for lack of a better way to put it. So that's basically where we're at for the stream. That's kind of what to expect. And yeah, I was different growing up. I struggled with a lot of things. I frequently was accused of lying by my teachers because I would often lose my homework, or I would not complete specific kinds of tasks, or I wouldn't be able to focus in class. But I wasn't like the disruptive kind of not able to focus that you think of when you think of ADHD. Like most people, when you think of ADHD, let's face it, they think of like the boy in the corner who might be shooting spitballs at the chick in front of him, or throwing things around the room, or just causing a ruckus, the class clown. You know, they think of somebody who can't focus for any length of time on anything. Like they think of it as this, like you're wild and zany and crazy and hyperactive, but that's only one type of ADHD. In fact, when I was growing up, ADHD was divided into two different things. Most of us are familiar with the idea of, say, for example, Asperger's and autism, but Asperger's was folded into the autism spectrum on the DSM-5. Well, something very similar happened with ADHD and ADD, attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But the thing is when I was growing up, they didn't really find that stuff in people that were assigned female at birth at all. they didn't generally pay attention to it. But part of that is because most of us tend to present symptoms differently. I had a hard time paying attention in class, but I still got at least adequate, sometimes above average grades, and I tested phenomenally, which I know that some folks with ADHD don't. I know that some folks, like, you know, one of the learning accommodations you can get for your kids, if your kids have ADHD, is not needing to be timed during tests for like normal tests that aren't like your state standardized tests, because some folks have a hard time with test timing. But when you like look at kind of my experience growing up, I got a lot of comments on my report cards that said things like, Allie needs to pay attention to class even on topics that she's not interested in. Allie needs to actually get her homework done, and she needs to get her homework done when she's not in class. Because that's something that I used to do, actually, is I would read the chapter before. And for those of us who had crappy teachers growing up, like, let's face it, most of us, if you read the chapter, you got it, right? And I had all the time in the world at home to read the chapter, but I could not pay attention to the life of me of some teacher like droning on at a whiteboard teaching me exactly the thing that I learned the night before when I read the next chapter. So I would do my homework when I was in class, in part because my house was also chaotic, which you guys probably know. And one teacher in high school actually stopped writing the homework at the beginning of class specifically to try to force me to stop doing that, even though I knew there was a very good chance that if I didn't do my homework in class, that I wouldn't get it done. And I had other teachers that, like, you know, again, they didn't teach much beyond the subject material. I would read books and things in their class that were outside of it. I read The Origin of Species during biology class, and occasionally my teacher would call on me and I would kind of pick up signs of when that might happen. So I'd listen to what she said and like repeat what she said verbatim back. But it wasn't because I was paying attention per se. It was because I kind of knew the signs that I might get picked on. So the issue here, though, is this assumption that you can't focus ever, that being central to what ADHD is in the public consciousness. Like, the thumbnail of this video was total clickbait, but it kind of illustrates one of the big problems I have with the way that the public views. Because how many of you have heard the joke, well, they say that I have ADHD, but they just don't understand. Oh, look, a squirrel. Or they talk about, you know, somebody squirreling, and like, you know, in Up, there was the dog that was like squirrel and da-da-da, and people called the dog, oh, they're so ADHD, or oh, I'm so ADHD, I can't focus. You know, people with OCD get something similar. And it's not really like that. Like, I couldn't focus in class, but when I got home, I could read the chapters as long as there wasn't chaos going on. But I had a hard time doing homework because part of me knew that, like, I was going to get the shit right in tests, and that homework was just there to, like, prove that I understood what I was reading. Well, I know I understood what I was reading. Like, I'm getting good grades on the test, so why do I have to turn in homework? Like, why do you care? You know, I did much better in university, actually, because of this. Because, like, you know, you got to write papers, and you got to write papers on interesting stuff quite often, so I got to get engaged with the topic. Carpathia of Lilin, thank you so much for the $5 super chat. Burning extra RAM just in case. I'm glad you're doing this topic. It's important to show that learning disabilities are common and not shameful. Thank you so much. Merocat, I will get to the comorbidity and the mistaking between autism spectrum, ADHD, and the comorbidity between the two, and the fact that they often get mistaken for each other. I'll get into that later in the stream when I talk a little bit more about kind of the diagnostic process and going through that. But it's not, like, in beyond, this is actually a really good observation here. A lot of people assume ADHD is just not being able to focus at all. From what I've seen, it's a dial-one focus. Instead of being linear, it's binary. Focus, true or false, no in between. There is kind of a little bit of in between, but that little bit of in between, there's still, I have what I would describe as like an interest-based nervous system. People in my streams and live chats often marvel at my ability to delve deep into research and fall down into rabbit holes and completely obsess over the things that I love. And that is very true. I absolutely can do that. I have combined type ADHD. But the thing is, you know, much like I couldn't focus in class, that's that side of that dial. There's another side that doesn't get talked about near as much, and that's hyperfocus. And that is, I can't stop focusing. And hyperfocus is different than like flow. Flow is more like a natural state. If you're creative, you're kind of engaged with your project, you're enjoying what you're doing. But then hyperfocus, on the other side, hyperfocus is I literally cannot stop. It's like the best example that I can give for neurotypical people is you get on Facebook or Twitter or some other social media and you just keep scrolling and you know you have something you need to do, but you just keep scrolling. And you know that like you're not finding anything interesting. There's nothing you want to click on, but you just keep scrolling. And your brain is trying to give you the order to go do the dishes, go do your homework, go, read, go like whatever thing you need to do. But you just keep scrolling. It's like your brain has been hijacked. And it's like that. But let's say instead of social media, let's say you're gaming or you're researching something or you're knitting or you're doing cross stitch or you're doing some kind of hobby, right? It's more like that scrolling now becomes this sort of tunnel vision. And time stops existing. Sometimes you forget to eat if it gets extreme enough. I have spent entire days without eating. I have spent upwards of 12 hours, and my first sign of hunger was dizziness and headaches. That's the other side. And so people say, like, let's say knitting is I'm going to use a term on the autism spectrum here, special interest, because like most people with ADHD have multiple. In fact, most of us have a lot of them. And there's like this sort of hobby roulette thing. And I'll talk about that later. But like, let's say that the focus of your current interest is, say, knitting or something. You can make this incredible, beautiful cabled skirt and hat. And people just marvel at the artistry and the detail. But then you can't get the dishes done. And so people think that you're lazy and that you only care about that cable knitting, when in reality, executive dysfunction, which is the name for this sort of pendulum of focus that we go on, it's called executive dysfunction. In reality, my brain, if you were to take a scan of it, you would actually see that the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that like tells you need to get up and delivers the order to get up and go do those dishes that you need to do, is actually less dense than a neurotypical person. There are less like neurological receptors there. We also have less dopamine receptors. It's actually it's an actual like developmental thing. It's a genetic disorder. If you have ADHD, you were born with it and you will probably have it your entire life. The idea that people grow out of it is a myth. The majority of us do not grow out of it. If you grow out of it, you were probably misdiagnosed. The vast majority of us just learn how to cope with it. And some people get off medication when they're adults because they don't like the way that they were treated. And when we start talking about treatment in a bit, I will get into the difference between showing up at a psychiatrist's office as an adult and showing up as a kid, because I was actually misdiagnosed as a kid, which often happens to people who are assigned female at birth. AFAB folks are far more likely to be misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression, because in much the same way that, say, people who are assigned male at birth, like fidgeting and hyperactivity are big symptoms that tip people off, and they tip people off at a pretty young age, right? Like fidgeting on your desk or chewing on your pen caps or like switching your foot, which by the way, I'm constantly fidgeting while I'm on screen. I fidget with the headphone cord. I twitch my foot. I have a number of tactile but not noisy stims that I do that you guys can't see because I'm not on camera, but I do constantly fidget. Like even when I'm recording, I do. I cannot stop moving. And here's what often happens is that people who are assigned female at birth, we get glossed over because our hyperactivity, if you're combined type, tends to manifest as rambling, especially about the stuff we love, especially about our special interests. Anybody who's ever hung out with me in my Discord server knows that I will accidentally hijack any conversation for any length of freaking time if you mention anything I'm interested in whatsoever. I can participate fairly in most regards, but the second you mention one of my interests, Hellenism, knitting, gardening, sewing, there's a list. Most people in my server know the list. If you want to really get me mad, like bring up Platonism. But if you talk about any of those things, I will accidentally completely steal the conversation and ramble about it and have no social ability to realize that I'm doing that. Now, I've been working on it. I really try to make sure that I can get my stuff out within less than a paragraph rather than like needing an entire term paper's worth of time. And being a part of this community has honestly helped me a lot with that. Getting feedback from folks who have gotten frustrated by that has helped a lot with that, especially because I don't have like any sort of visual cues in a voice chat with which to see that I'm doing this. It's a major point of personal growth for me. But like coming back to kind of this thing, when you're a kid growing up and you're assigned female at birth, the social punishment for that is so much worse. Like somebody who's assigned male at birth who, you know, is fidgety and hyperactive, there's a certain amount of societal allowance for that. But if you, as somebody who are assigned female at birth, if you step out of line, if you talk too much, if you don't get along socially, the punishment from both like other assigned female at birth people and assigned male at birth people, the punishment from your fellow students on both sides is completely, it's terrible. I was bullied growing up. I had to learn how to physically defend myself at a pretty young age because I was bullied really badly. And that's something that you kind of have to contend with if you're dealing with this. And I guess going back to looking at kind of some of those early signs, right? Because when I went in for diagnosis, and we'll get there, trust me. Again, this is a little bit later in life, but when I went in for diagnosis, like I was asked, because my psychiatrist actually specialized in neurodevelopmental things. I got lucky that I was able to find one that did, because she recognized that in me. But growing up, I thought there was something wrong with me. I hated myself so much growing up because I could write papers on, I was obsessed with the Egyptian gods. I've talked about this in the past, right? Ancient Egyptian religion or paleontology or linguistics, or like, I wrote an entire novel when I was a kid. I wrote poetry that like got published when I was a kid. I could do that, but I couldn't get my fucking homework done. I couldn't pay attention in class. I thought that I was lazy, and I was treated like I was. I was punished for being lazy by my parents. I was held to an extraordinarily high standard, and yet these things, as I found out doing research into ADHD, a lot of this was that. And it opened my eyes so much. Thank you, Ikeda Hakubi, for the cry emoji, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. And I'm seeing a lot of relating in the chat, and I'm not ignoring you guys. I'm just kind of like, it's kind of intense to talk about this a little bit because there's parts of my childhood that I don't talk about. I talk about my parents a lot, but I don't talk about like my schooling and stuff because it was rough. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. And part of the reason for that was because of my symptoms. You know, the excessive talking gets you punished if you're assigned female at birth. That hyperactivity component does. That inability, for example, to remember dates. Like I have a Google Calendar. People think I'm so organized because I have a Google Calendar and a physical calendar, but it's like, no, if I was organized, I wouldn't need those things. And like I said, as we get into the stream, I'll start talking about coping mechanisms, but I'm talking more about my symptoms now and like how long they've spanned, because I cannot remember a time in my life where I was not affected by my ADHD. I can't. There is not a time in my life where I have not struggled with one or more of these things. And what I will say is even getting medicated as an adult, which again is a very different experience from being medicated potentially even against your will as a kid. Like working with my psychiatrist has been it's been struggle, but it's also been kind of a dream in a way, because medication has opened doors for me that I have not had trying to deal with it alone. And finding out that I have an interest-based nervous system, which is the best way to put it. Like if I'm interested in something, I can't stop focusing. You can't control hyperfocus, but you can kind of predict it to some degree, because if you're passionate about something, it will happen and you have to prepare for that. But the problem is that you need to know you have it, because the solution to remembering somebody's birthday, for example, a physical calendar might not work for you if you've got ADHD and say you use your phone all the time. Or actually, you know, like a physical calendar might work better for you than say a Google Calendar would, because your phone is a black box of mystery upon which things that trigger your hyperfocus might show up. I know, for example, that in the morning, I cannot get on social media for a certain amount of time after I get up. And it's not just because of the medications I have to take. It's also because if I do, and many of you have talked to me in the morning on my Discord, so you will know this, I don't fully have that awareness of time if I get engrossed in a conversation to stop myself like somebody with like that's neurotypical might, and then go and get my work done. In fact, if I don't front row load certain self-care tasks, things like working out or meditating or worship into the early part of my day, they don't get done at all. Because it's like the amount of like wherewithal I have to get important things done wanes as the day goes on. And that's another experience with having ADHD. That's another thing that I've found so often with other people that I've related to. And again, because executive dysfunction is a symptom that is shared between both like ADHD and autism, I find actually that folks that are on the spectrum are easier sometimes to talk to, along with folks with ADHD, than folks that are not. Because the crazy way that my brain makes connections that are unrelated, the chaos in my head that perpetually exists, as I used to put it before I knew that I had ADHD, the 15 thought trains that sometimes run into each other that are perpetually going in my head, those folks have them too. And so much like, if you guys haven't seen my Christy Abbey stream, it's in the Xenia Bridge playlist. Go check it out like after this stream if you haven't. Christy Abbey and I, in that and in the interview that I did on her channel, which is actually linked in the description of that video, talked at length about how like folks on the spectrum and folks with ADHD, even if the folks on the spectrum don't also have ADHD, and again, folks on the spectrum are actually far more likely to have it comorbid than folks that don't. Though ADHD is, from what I read, the most common like genetic psychiatric condition in the world, followed by autism. And autism, again, like they seem to be on the same genetic line, was the research that I read, but don't quote me on that. I'm not a specialist. It's just me recalling vaguely something. I don't have a source that I can cite. I just read a paper on it years ago and remember it, and maybe it's outdated now. But I do know that that comorbidity and that commonality exists, and we seem to be able to relate more. And I'm going to get into, like, I see people bringing up kind of mood stuff. Oh, Variance, thank you so much for your super chat. $10 super chat from Variance. Sends teary-eyed hugs. I wish I could have been there, if only to nerd out with you as a kid, because I was very much like that. Comfort and protection to you, my friend, for all it helps. Thank you so much. I've actually really found my community here. Like, I still annoy people, and I know I still annoy people, but like, I feel like I found a lot more acceptance here. And I've also noticed that perhaps as a result of the fact that both the co-hosts of my live show and also I have ADHD, because Jen has talked about that publicly with me on this channel, so I feel comfortable sharing that. We tend to attract a rather neurodiverse audience, I've noticed, and a lot of you guys are really patient with me, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. Apologies to any trans folks, by the way. You guys is completely gender neutral up here. I'm not trying to misgender anybody at all. I promise. It's just I live in Washington, and you guys is a gender neutral term. I try to use folks as often as I can. If I make mistakes, I'm sorry. But there's positives to it too, though. Like, hyperfocus is a freaking superpower if your hyperfocus happens to be, for example, what you do for a living. I can hyperfocus on writing novels. I can also hyperfocus on research, as I've talked about for this channel. And that skill has allowed me to create some of the most incredible, detailed, and well-researched videos with upwards of 15, like it's a 20-minute video with upwards of 15 citations. And I read every single one of those papers and probably the whole monograph and not just a chapter or two, because if you get into hyperfocus, it is a freaking superpower. It really is. But you can't control it, is the problem. You can try to hijack it. And again, when I get into coping techniques in a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about how to leverage your nervous system to get the things you want. Because if you learn how to manipulate yourself like that, as somebody who's neurodivergent, you can actually start to circumvent some of the struggles that come from having this disorder. But there's also an incredible creativity that comes from it. Neurodivergence, like especially ADHD and autism, when you've got these 15 thought tracks, sometimes they collide in ways that nobody else's would. Sometimes you come up with a story or a premise, or you get fascinated by a rabbit hole that literally nobody else on the planet gave a flying crap about. And yet here you are exploring this thing and thinking in this unorthodox way. So there's this beauty to it too. And for the most part, mine I've coped with enough and I've set up my life enough in such a way that I got lucky in the sense that the things that I hyper focus on more often than not tend to be the things that I do for a living. I'm an author and a YouTuber. These are the things I do for a living, and I happen to love both of them with my entire soul, to the point where my partners even understand I could never love another human being the way I love my work. And that's okay, because like that kind of needy love is probably not the healthiest thing anyway. You know, like codependency is not healthy. But like there is that positive. And I've cracked jokes several times to friends in private that, you know, I don't mind my ADHD most of the time. Sometimes it's a pain in the ass when I can't get myself to do the dishes because I'm obsessed with reading some monograph or another. But for the most part, I've gotten myself to the point where it's not disrupting my life, but other people don't like it very much. Because socially, there's a lot of stuff that does that is just not the best thing in terms of interacting with other humans. People take getting impulsive and cutting someone off because you get excited about something that you really want to say and you can't remember it personally and get pissed at you. People take rambling about something that you're passionate about as you being long-winded and hogging attention and hijacking conversation. I have gotten to the point where I self-deprecate because before other people can mock me, because I'm so used to people getting annoyed with me, to people getting mad at me. And that brings me to another symptom, rejection sensitive dysphoria. So this is not dysphoria as in like gender dysphoria, though that's very common among people with ADHD and on the spectrum. And again, I'm not going to speak for people on the spectrum. If I mention something on the spectrum, it's something that I just know overlaps. And I want folks on the spectrum to tell their own stories. This is like, I'm not on the spectrum. I just know a lot of people that are. So if I talk about something overlapping, it means it's because I have friends who have shared these things with me. Okay, I want to keep caveating that. But rejection sensitive dysphoria is something that I've met a lot of people on the spectrum who also experience. And that is this immediate reaction, overwhelming emotion to perceived rejection. And I get it pretty bad. Keep in mind, I don't get it for just like random, you know, yahoos on the street kind of thing. Like it doesn't bother me, but like my real friends, the people that I really care about, every single one of you has probably heard me talk about it at least once, because it's gone off at least once, because it's a form of social anxiety that is exacerbated by ADHD symptoms that develops because we're rejected so much. And because part of your prefrontal cortex being underdeveloped and having less dopamine receptors in it and all the other things that go with that is that emotional regulation becomes a lot more difficult. My sadness is so intense. My anger is overwhelming. My happiness and joy take me to the freaking ceiling, and fear feels like my whole body is so tense. My muscles physically hurt. And rejection sensitive dysphoria is fear and social anxiety for perceived rejection. And some folks get violent or angry with it. I'm not one of those. Some folks get severe anxiety attacks and panic attacks, which is usually what happens to me. And some people get this incredible, almost like trigger warning for a particular term here, incredible, almost suicidal levels of depression from it. But the second that I feel like somebody has rejected me or that they're mad at me, this can trigger. And again, this has to be somebody that I value. This has to be somebody that I care about, which is part of the reason why there's this perpetual struggle for me between wanting to have friends and get to know people, but also know that there's this roller coaster. And it's not really codependency per se. It's this immediate internal reaction that no amount of logic can necessarily get you through, because emotions for somebody with ADHD are just that much more intense. That's not to say there's something wrong with being neurotypical or not. It's just, they're harder to cope with. It takes a lot more to learn how to cope with them. And rejection sensitive dysphoria paired with the level of rejection you get as somebody with ADHD makes finding and keeping friends incredibly hard. Like, it makes it ridiculously difficult because, again, a lot of people take RSD really personally, you know, if I come to a friend and I'm like, hey, you haven't talked to me in like 3 weeks, I'm a little worried about you. And also the last time we interacted, XYZ thing happened. Are you mad at me? Now, because of the fact that I'm very upfront with most of my friends about the fact that this is a symptom, I'll usually do it in a bit more of a snarky way. I'll be like, my brain is being stupid, help. But for some folks that don't have that, or don't have friends that are, say, as understanding as many of mine are, what you might get is, how dare you assume that about me? Did you really think I thought that about you? Did you really think this way? Like, there's a lot less tolerance in less, let's say, emotionally intelligent people for that kind of reaction. And so you get this kind of inbuilt self-loathing. And I've struggled with that for most of my life. I've struggled with confidence issues for most of my life because of this. And it's part of the reason why AFAB folks, especially, we tend to get missed, because that anxiety and that depression, that's not independent anxiety and depression because my brain's messed up. That's directly caused by the fact that my brain is not wired the ways that yours is. So like the solutions to that laziness or that impulsive talking or that cutting someone off, those things, our brains work differently. The solution you'd get from a self-help book written for neurotypical people don't work for us because the problem is different. It's not a lack of self-control. My brain is physically different from yours. And most people don't understand that. And that's part of why I wanted to talk a little bit about my own experience with ADHD, especially because I have a lot of the inattentive symptoms. I can get very lost in my head very easily, to the point where at times I can hear every word you're saying and my brain will not translate them as meaning anything. I can be looking directly at you and paying attention to every word you say, and my brain will just be like, I didn't actually understand that. Can you please repeat it? And sometimes I'm able to garner from continued conversation what that context was, but sometimes I have to admit that. And again, less understanding people don't necessarily help. They're not necessarily accepting of that. I can be trying to listen to you and my brain will fuck off into something that I was researching, and I might accidentally even change the topic without realizing that that happened. And people will get mad because they don't understand that that's literally how my brain is wired. And especially if I'm off my medication, I don't have full control over that all the time. I try so hard to be so self-conscious. I monitor myself constantly. I'm aware that these things are issues. I'm aware that I cut people off. I'm aware that I hijack conversations. I'm aware that sometimes I just don't understand what you're saying, even though I'm trying to listen. I'm aware that all these things happen, but they're still going to happen. I can control as much as I can, but they're still going to happen because that's the way my brain is wired. And so you come back to this idea that, oh, look, a squirrel. Like, okay, so for the neurodivergent folks in the chat, please give me an F if you would be a millionaire by now if somebody gave you a quarter for every time you've heard that fucking joke, right? Like, there's a reason I put it in my thumbnail, right? Like, it's definitely a trope that you hear over and over because they don't take us seriously. You know, give me an H in the chat if you've ever heard the one about, oh, well, you don't need Adderall, you just need a swift kick in the ass or a cane to the bottom or whatever version of it is, like corporal punishment of some kind. They think that they can beat a neurological developmental disorder out of us. But they can't. And so now that I've kind of come through a little bit of both modern and like my childhood kind of symptoms, the way that I experienced it, let's talk a little bit about how I came to be diagnosed. The chat is both very F and very H. Please pay respects for the collective mental health of my neurodivergent folks in my chat. Thank you guys so much for coming out. But we come now to where I decided to seek diagnosis. Because part of this was actually one of my partners has ADHD, and for their privacy, I'm not going to talk about which one. When I like when that partner moved in, they had taken themselves off of medication, but they were struggling so hard with symptoms being off of it, especially because they had been on Adderall XR from a very young age. And I got permission to share some of these things before the stream. So I'm okay talking about it, but just the partner doesn't want you to know which one it is, and that's fine. But Midnight Mist, the H's were for if you'd ever heard that somebody could in some way have corporal punishment, be corporal punishmented, beaten, hit, etc. out of ADHD symptoms. Press an H for that. So that partner needed the medication, and we spent a long time trying to convince them that it was okay. And me and the other partner convinced them that it was okay for them to go back and seek help. And while they were in the process of that, my counselor that I was seeing at the time, that I'd started seeing for PTSD, picked up in occasional couples sessions, because this particular partner has some, their ADHD manifests in some symptoms that were triggering to my PTSD through no fault of their own. So we did couples counseling sessions every so often with this counselor. The counselor started to notice the similarities between my behavior and my partner's. And it became more and more obvious. And as like my writing career was also starting to build up at this time, and I was starting to struggle with the workload, not because I couldn't do the amount of work I needed to do, but because I couldn't be as consistent. And up until then, I hadn't been taking it as a full-blown career. It was more of a kind of a hobby that I was doing in the background. So coming back to what led me to diagnosis was I had a breakdown at one point, because for several weeks straight, I was able to be consistent with my word counts. Because again, I wasn't a YouTuber yet. This is years ago. But I was able to do like these various hobby things. I think it was drawing. I was able to be consistent with like drawing for hours, but I could not get myself to do these word counts regularly. And my counselor suggested, you might have ADHD and you might want to go talk to a psychiatrist. Well, the problem is, as I mentioned, I got misdiagnosed with anxiety and depression as a kid. So my first reaction was, fuck that noise, because I had really bad experience with SSRIs. This weird gene runs in my family where like opiates, for example, make me hear stuff. I don't just hear stuff normally. I've never heard stuff outside of opiates. And this one particular, I was put on Prozac as a kid, and it made me numb and also made me hear things. And I did not like that. And so I was scared that like, you know, any ADHD medication would do the same thing. I was very anti-medication. I was scared to death. I did not want to go see a psychiatrist. But my counselor worked on me and worked on me and worked on me and got me to the point where I was okay with going. And so I did. And when I went to go see the psychiatrist, she sat me down and we had an 1.5 hour long session for our first session. And she asked me a bunch of questions about my childhood to begin with. Now, I didn't tell her that I was there to get evaluated for ADHD, but she had me do like the depression survey that they always have you do, like rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 for all these different things. And they add your points up and figure out if you're depressed or not. I wasn't depressed. I ranked really high on anxiety, but like I have PTSD. Of course, I'm going to rank high on the anxiety spectrum. PTSD is an anxiety spectrum disorder. But then she started asking me questions about my childhood, and she made note of the fact that my foot was perpetually twitching and that I was fidgeting with my coat and with a pen and other things, like I tapped. And as she kind of went through a lot of these questions that she asked about my childhood, a pattern started to emerge, and she told me that I had combined type ADHD and offered to put me on Ritalin. Now, this experience is a little different than a lot of people, because especially POCs, a lot of us get treated as drug seekers. My partner certainly did. He was on state insurance at the time. And so there was this idea that people on state insurance that were seeking Adderall, even though he had records growing up that he had it, they treated him like he was a drug seeker. And so it was a lot harder for him to get back on Adderall. They made him like get on Ritalin, which my doctor started me on Ritalin, but she was more than willing to work with me when it didn't work. She upped my dose. She, gave me like extended release, etc. And then eventually we tried Vyvanse, and like we also tried Strattera. And then we eventually settled on Adderall XR, which I tried the generics for. And I talked a little bit in the last coalition about healthcare, or 2 coalitions ago about healthcare, that Unfortunately, the generics, because the release mechanism in the generic Adderall XRs is not the same, it doesn't work properly. And so I ended up with heart palpitations and other things from it. I have to have the brand name, and my insurance is going to stop covering that. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But my doctor, one of the differences, I think, between the stories I've heard about people who as kids went in for ADHD treatment versus me going in as an adult, my doctor is my partner in the sense of we're working together like they are my partner in crime, so to speak. We're working together to try to get me functional. And so, like, at the very least, a good psychiatrist, and I recommend going to a psychiatrist and not a family doctor, because family doctors do not get a good amount of education in mental health stuff. They just don't. Like, ask for a referral to a psychiatrist if you've got insurance that can afford it, because psychiatrists are literally trained in this stuff. And if you think you've got ADHD, go to a psychiatrist who specializes in it, because especially if you're assigned female at birth or a POC or both, you're going to get much better chances of, at the very least, being fairly evaluated and figuring out whether you have ADHD or just something that looks like it, if you go to somebody who knows what ADHD actually looks like. Which I got lucky. My psychiatrist did. And we tried several different doses and several different medications, and it took a really, really long time, over the course of about 2-3 years, before I finally settled on my current dose of Adderall XR that's been helping me for a long, long time. And I'll be honest with you guys, Adderall XR, it does not fix all of those symptoms. You guys have seen me fuck off into, take the boob train to mammary land with Jen on streams before, get completely distracted on tangents, hijack conversations in my own Discord server, especially when my meds are kicking out. Like that concert in my head that I talked about earlier, that kind of chaos. What this does is it goes from being an indoor concert to turning the volume down so that you're probably out in the parking lot. Maybe you can still hear the music. It's still distracting, but you might be able to tune it out and maybe get your homework done if you really try. That's kind of what meds do. They're not magic, but they help a lot. And not everybody does need them, per se. Some folks can set up a lifestyle in which they don't necessarily. I know that I do, because my hyperfocus will rule my entire life if I don't take them. Because I can't get videos edited and done, because I'll get trapped in research cycles and perfectionism, because I won't get stories written, because I get distracted by new ideas. I know that I do. I won't pressure anybody into medication, but I will say that you shouldn't be afraid to seek it, especially if you're an adult, because I had a lot more control over my treatment working with a psychiatrist as an adult than any person that I've ever met who had a bad experience, especially as a kid. When you're walking into a psychiatrist's office trying to work with another human to make your life a little more bearable, it's a different dynamic than when your parents are walking in trying to make your symptoms go away. And even if you have the most loving, well-intentioned parents, a lot of parents think that medication's a magic pill that's just going to make the symptoms go away. They don't want to learn the coping techniques that it's going to take, because there's a lot of life skills you got to learn if you've got ADHD. It's insane. It's an entirely multifaceted approach. And often, for those of us who get diagnosed later especially, it's often comorbid with a lot of other things. I don't have generalized anxiety disorder, but I do have pretty severe social anxiety. And a lot of that has to do with RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, like I mentioned earlier. But some of that also has to do with PTSD from the trauma that I had growing up. Some of that has to do with the trauma that I have perpetually from the way the world punishes my symptoms. And that's not to say that, you should just, accept people who are on the spectrum or who have this diagnosis being assholes. That doesn't mean put up with jerk behavior at all. That's not what I'm advocating for here. But when your initial immediate response is to be a complete and utter dick, you don't realize how much more you might be adding to that person's trauma if that just happens to be the case. So, if you got over-medicated as a kid and then you got yourself off it as an adult and you're still struggling, I feel for you. I really do. I wish my parents had taken me in for diagnosis, but part of me is worried that my parents, as abusive as they were, would have been the kind that thought the pill was going to make my problems go away. Or that would, for example, give the pill credit for a higher score on a test rather than me, which happened to another friend of mine who has comorbid autism and ADHD. It's a story that they tell. I bleed for you because I know how scary it would be to walk in a psychiatrist's office as an adult if you kicked yourself off the medication, but you think you might need it. The loss of control that you might feel, the fear of being over-medicated or put back on your old dose. But I can tell you that if you have a good psychiatrist, it's a completely different experience. And I will 100% say it is worth your time to find a good psychiatrist in order to have that experience. Because a good doctor can make the difference between being functional and being afraid. It really can. So on the subject, I guess, of coping mechanisms and the like, because I do have quite a few of them. For one thing, one of the first things that I do is I have a very strict morning routine that I know helps set the stage for my day. And I designed this rather scientifically, actually. I did a crap load of research on my condition and also on a bunch of things that help boost, say, dopamine production. Because again, people with ADHD, we don't have a dopamine deficiency. We have less receptors for it. So it just takes a lot more of that magic happy chemical, focus chemical, reward chemical to do what it would for a normal person. You know, a neurotypical person can go do those dishes and you'll get a dopamine hit for that. You'll feel good about yourself. I have to do those dishes, mop the floor, and clean the counters, and maybe clean out the fridge, and probably make a grocery list before I get that same level of satisfaction. So it's not necessarily that I'm impulsive. It's just that it takes a lot more of that happy feel-good chemical to reward. And that's also why people with ADHD are also at a high risk for addiction, especially for things like gaming and gambling. We are very, very likely to constantly be seeking that because most of us have a really hard time feeling positive without getting hijacked by hyperfocus. It's this perpetual like plank that we're walking. So coming back to coping mechanisms, I designed my morning routine rather like scientifically. And part of it is a certain amount of time in the morning while I wait for my medication to kick in where I'm allowed to do anything other than get on my phone. I can read, I can meditate. I often meditate. Sometimes I use hypnosis sessions. Hypnosis is not like evidence-based, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it works well for me. Yeah, Gaius, tightrope and flip-flops, yes. That from earlier. But what I do after that is I generally pre-prep breakfast every week so that I have tubs of it because I don't do like sweet breakfast. I don't do cereal and stuff like that. I do like stir fries and like hash and that kind of thing. And I have breakfast and then I go downstairs and we have a gym. So you would have to drive to a gym or like do a body weight workout or something like this if you didn't have that. But I do a workout every day right after breakfast. And part of the reason for that is that workouts do a massive dopamine dump, which helps you focus for the entire day. So I do the workout, and then if I didn't meditate during the early part of the day, I will meditate immediately after that, often. And then I go and I do my worship. And I have all of these things placed together. Now, for those of you who don't have houses or don't live in your own apartment, this might be less useful. But for those of you who do and might want to reorganize, my office, my gym, and my ritual room are all next to each other. And I designed my house that way on purpose so that it would be as easy as possible to transition from workout to meditation to worship to work. And I go straight to work after worship. And the reason for that is that dopamine high that I just got from working out, which, you know, you might think doesn't happen, but runner's high is a real thing. It actually does help. Working out broke my writer's block. Actually, I wrote a blog post about that forever ago on my blog that is now dead. And I know that for that first hour or two after I work out, I am far less likely both to end up with hyperfocus, but I'm also far less likely to not be able to focus and start at all. In fact, task transitioning is much, much easier after workout. In fact, if you are neurodivergent and you're struggling with homework or something, get up, go for a walk, or do push-ups or sit-ups or something that gets your blood pumping for 5 to 10 minutes. It becomes a lot easier to then task transition back to working on whatever it is that's important. It can help so freaking much. And the thing is if I execute that entire morning routine, which I don't always, but I do my best, then I know I'm going to have a good work day because I get that running start that makes it so much easier. But for every hour I delay, it's like my spoons are getting pulled down the drain because I'm not getting that stimulation that I need, that dopamine hit that's going to help me focus. So I'm less likely to work out later in the day. I'm less likely to, have a proper, I'm less likely to eat at all, honestly, if I don't eat breakfast. I'll skip lunch. I'll skip breakfast and lunch all the way to dinner because Adderall makes it so you don't feel hungry. So I just forget to eat no matter what it is that I'm doing. But one of the reasons I've been complaining about recording and about the loudness of the contractors during the time that I would normally work is that I know that if I don't work right when I'm supposed to during my normal time that day, then it probably won't get done. I probably won't have the spoons to force myself to actually go and record that damn video or do the editing or whatever it is, whatever task it is that script writing is pretty easy, but in research I can hyper focus on, but editing and recording, audio editing is a pain. Go ask Ocean about it sometime. He's complained about it on this channel during the 1K Q&A. It is a lot of fucking work to take all of those breaths and all the pauses and all the mistakes and everything out of recording. If you've listened to me live, you'll know that I false start, I stammer, I add filler words. You remove all that stuff so that edited videos sound amazing. That takes a long time. And it takes a lot of spoons if it's not a special interest. And the making the video part is not the special interest for me. It's the research and the scripting, right? And yes, Midnight Mist, you are correct. There are studies that say object permanence is difficult for those of ADHD, and that's why losing things is so common. It's also very difficult for us to remember where, I remember where I put things, but I don't remember that things have a place. I've struggled with that my entire life. My desk is very cluttered because there's a lot of things on it. I know exactly what each of those things are and where they belong and why they're there. But if I were to try to put them away on a shelf, I would not remember where they were because my brain tells me that they're still scattered on my desk somewhere. It's organized chaos. It works for me. But when I've been complaining about the contractors, if they are loud until 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and I normally start recording around noon, right? So now that's 6 hours of, let's say, a spoon getting kicked off an hour, and I've got maybe 8. What makes you think that 2 spoons is going to give me enough energy to actually go and record? Which is why that entire video is probably going to be recorded and edited tomorrow because the contractors are done and I actually can. So I'm hoping to get this week's video released on Friday or Saturday Friday for patrons and Saturday for the public. But when I'm complaining about that, that's why. Because I don't necessarily have the ability to make my prefrontal cortex do more than it's capable of. And if my meds are already half kicked out because I take them at 10 in the morning, if my meds are already half kicked out, you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to be a lot freaking harder to get me to do it. Sometimes I can, but the expectation that I can't. So, no, the stream is not going to stay up after. Oh, but Mark Mudge, are you asking if there's going to be a VOD? There will be a VOD. The stream itself won't stay up after I'm done, but the VOD, the recording of the stream will. I hope that I understood your question. So, as far as, I guess, kind of trying to talk more about coping mechanisms, I've engineered my life in such a way between the location of everything in my home and even the morning routine that I do and I have a particular minimum standard that I know I can accomplish on bad days. That's another thing. Perfectionism is something that will kick your ass if you've got ADHD. A lot of us suffer from it. It's one of the things I've had to struggle with most of my life. I've had to learn that what I can do on a bad day is the standard. not what I can do on a good day, not what I can do with hyperfocus. It's what I can do on a bad day. So I have a weekly set where research needs to be organized and marked by a certain day of the week, usually Friday or Saturday. Script needs to be written by Sunday, like recording needs to happen on Monday, and Tuesday I need to get editing done and get it up for my patrons. That's my normal standard for this. Obviously, circumstances have made that very difficult for me. But those things, if you do something like that, I know that I can get my research marked by Saturday. I know that even in the bad week, I can get that stuff done, which is why I've been so consistent for the most part, except for when I've gotten sick. But there's also things like proper sleep hygiene that I have to apply. I turn my electronics off by half an hour to 45 minutes before bed. Most nights, I do my best. If I'm talking on the phone right up until bed, my brain will not settle down for hours until I like to actually fall asleep. Because I know that on days that I don't sleep well, it's like I didn't take my medication. Which, if I hadn't taken my medication, it would be like, you know, I had woken up and I'm a freaking teenager again and my everything is just broken all the time. But, like, I know that my medication is significantly less effective and that my symptoms are far worse when I don't sleep well. So I have to practice a nightly ritual before I go to bed. And what's interesting is my brain rebels against all of this. It's not an easy thing to do. In fact, it took me upwards of 90 days to get this to be anything close to normal. And I still, if I slip up for more than a few days, I have to work my ass off to get back to that being my normal. Because my brain wants that chaos. It wants to be distracted. It wants to be perpetually engaged in all of these hyper-focused things. It wants to be pulled from one direction to the next. It does not enjoy structure, but I need that structure because without it, I won't get anything done. So that's one of those things where, as somebody who has that, you guys wonder about my output. Well, there it is. That's how I ensure that most weeks I get things done. And clearly, if I get sick or something, all that shit goes out the window. Everything gets hijacked. It's gone. There is nothing. But you can create a schedule for yourself, even if you don't have any external markers whatsoever. You can create a schedule for yourself to some degree to help ensure that you continue these things, that you are healthy. And so meditation is one of those things. It's incredibly difficult. I can only do it when I'm medicated and usually only after a workout, but I do it every day because getting to quiet those thoughts, even for a few minutes, can help me focus once I start work. But I had to chain all of those habits together. The workout, the worship, the meditation, the beginning of work, the breakfast, all of that, the order that I gave you originally. I had to chain all of those habits together in order to make it effective. Because if I didn't, then A, none of them would get done, more than likely, or maybe only one or two. And B, the cumulative effect of, okay, now I can start work doesn't happen. But once you get that to the point where it feels normal, you also have to stop yourself from the perfectionism that says when you miss a day, now it's not worth it anymore because you're not perfect. And that's one of the most difficult parts of having this, is that you have to be perfect or it's not worth it. Ikeda Hakubi asks, how has your faith helped you to cope? So I have a little bit of UPG here. I guess I'll share it here and see if any of you consider this, but there's a little bit of stuff in the myths to back it up. But I think Hermes is kind of the patron god of those of us with ADHD. My experience of him has been that he helps me a lot. I know that a lot of people turn to Ares for like internal strength and things, but Hermes really seems to be, because patron of writing and all of that, like he's the person that I tend to turn to the most often when I'm struggling with flitting attention as it is. And in the myths, his very first thing after being born was to go run off with Apollon's herds, right? Like that's what he did. He's also kind of a jack of all trades. He's in charge of commerce. He's in charge of writing. His speed is his entire shindig. He's the messenger of the gods, but also an inventor and into science. And like, he has so many different competing interests, and he literally like runs off with Apollon's herds in that first myth. And then freaking lies to him until Zeus is like crying over laughing, and then makes him a friend by inventing the lyre, which becomes Apollon's signature thing. Tell me that's not, for those of you who have ADHD, tell me that's not the most ADHD thing you've ever heard of in your life. Like ever in your entire life. Like, give me an H in chat if you agree that that's one of the most ADHD things you've ever heard in your life. So in terms of my faith, worship helps to ground me because I trust that the gods won't give me more than I can handle. And I know that that's a really common refrain with Christians, but like as a pagan, I very much trust that. My reciprocity with the gods has given me that level of comfort. And it also helps to remind me that Goddess exists regardless of if I'm perfect or not. Goddess is immutable. That offering that I gave will forever be a part of that record between me and that god. And the gods are not the capricious way that mortals are. They understand my struggles. They know that if I didn't have any spoons to go down and work on that, you know, like say peace today, that's not a violation of my oath to the Mosai, because they understand that I said as best I could. Yes, the chat is very H. Whoops. So I would say that my faith, especially given that there is representation for most anything that you're concerned about somewhere in mythology, has definitely helped me with coming to acceptance. Praying to the gods to help me find my psychiatrist was, yeah, that was a thing that I did, and I just so happened to find the perfect one the first time, which I'm really grateful for. But I would say that in terms of trying to learn how to cope, in terms of trying to build this, like worship became a part of my morning routine. Now, if you're an atheist, obviously it's not going to be part of yours, and that's fine. But making worship, like chaining that onto my habits as I did with the others, you know, workout, breakfast, work, you know, meditation, all the other stuff, that made it so that I was guaranteed to keep that goddess up. And also so that I didn't have to go to sleep with that niggling feeling that I should have done something else. But same with setting my expectations a little bit lower, because you'd think that setting your expectations a little bit lower would make you less productive, but that's not actually true. If you set your expectations to accomplish what you can on a bad day and you have a normal day or even a good day, chances are you're going to exceed your expectations. Most of us don't just turn around and be like, I only needed to read the one book and now I'm done. When you've got a big project to work on, if you've got the energy to keep going, most of us will. And if you don't, well, you got the thing done and you can feel good about yourself. But if you set your expectations too high, you might give up. Because, well, why even start if I can't put 3 hours into writing, if I can't get 4,000 words in, if I can't get the entire script done today? Right? So those are kind of my biggest tips. Exercise is important. Meditation is important. I would say if you're just starting out trying to get a routine going to help cope with your symptoms, start with the one that seems like it would be the easiest to tackle and chain other habits onto that. Like try to figure out an order that would work best for your current lifestyle and chain other habits onto that. And know that if you're trying to start a habit, you have to give other things up and figure out what you're willing to give up too. Even though you might want to try to tell yourself you're not giving anything up. Like the example that I gave about social media, you are giving up scrolling endlessly on Facebook to get up and take a walk in the morning. Right? Like it may sound like, well, that's not a sacrifice. I shouldn't be scrolling on Facebook anyway. But clearly you're doing it for a reason, right? So there is still a loss there. And you kind of need to figure out what needs to go to make room for new habits, because currently you're a creature of habit as is. It's one of the biggest like revelations you can have. So Midnight Mist says, I have a problem with doing nothing as I get overwhelmed too easily. Now, what I've had to do for that is break down tasks into the tiniest components imaginable. If I want to get the dishes done, I'm not looking at the whole dishes. My first step is getting up off my butt, because that's the hardest bit, and going into the kitchen. And once I'm there, I only need to do one dish at a time. I can stop after this dish, and it's okay because I got one dish. Right? I can be okay because I got that one dish done, and that's all I have to do for right now, and that's still one more dish that is clean that was not clean before. And the perfectionist part of your brain's gonna be like, nah, no, you got to do all of it now that you started. You've got to do all of it, or you get to feel like shit. And you need to beat that perfectionist part of your brain to a pulp. Now, don't physically injure yourself. That's not what I'm saying. But like internally, like tell that perfectionist part of your brain to fuck off. So when you're struggling with even breaking down things, if you're having a hard time figuring out how you can do that, then contact a friend. Ask a friend for help figuring out how to break things down. Early on, before I got medicated, I had a rule in my little notebook that I kept that I could not have more than 3 important things that I had to do in a day. Those 3 important things could be tiny portions of a bigger project that I wanted to get done, finish 5 dishes or whatever I felt like I was capable of. But those 3 important things, I had a big long list outside of that I could pick and choose from afterwards, but I had to get those 3 things done to be okay. And I suggest something like that to begin with. If you need help breaking tasks down, talk to friends, figure out what the smallest thing you could do is, and then do it. And that's the big problem. Like, that's the big thing. And it is a learned skill. I will say breaking tasks down is a learned skill. You know, you don't write the whole short story start to finish. You write it in whatever number of word chunks you can manage in a day. You know, reading this book that you picked up is a portion of research. You don't read the whole freaking book at once. You might read this chapter today, and that might be what's on your list. So those are kind of some of the examples of building that, even though you might not know how to do it now. If you keep telling me, you know, or yourself even, I don't know how to do that now. I struggle with that now. Well, there's ways to help with that, but you can also end up perpetually procrastinating into what you already know, when in reality, that's kind of often more perfectionism that can get in the way of you building the skills you need in order to cope. So the actually acting on it, the problem with that midnight mist, the problem being actually acting on it. One of the ways that I've gotten myself to is, again, I've told myself, all I have to do is get up and go to the kitchen. I don't have to do the dish once I get there, but I found more often than not, getting up and going to the kitchen, I then will go and do that single dish. And that single dish might turn into more if I can, and then if I get overwhelmed, I can go sit down and I still have more dishes done than if I hadn't gotten up at all. Usually the actively acting on it, if you can reduce that down to the tiniest single step that you can possibly take, that's the easiest way to get yourself to act on it. Another really easy way is, so those of us with ADHD don't tend to respond to rewards and punishments quite the way that other people do. But if you have a thing that you're very interested in that you only allow yourself to do while you're, say, for example, I have a show, I only watch the show Lucifer when I'm working out. I have a TV downstairs in my gym, and when I'm on the treadmill, which I don't just do treadmill, I've got an entire weight set and other things, but when I'm actually on the treadmill, because I can't pay attention when I'm lifting weights all that well, there's too much pain involved. But when I am down there, that's the only time I get to watch that show. So if you find, say, a podcast or something you're interested in, and the only time you can listen to that podcast is when you're, say, doing dishes, you're allowed to turn it on as soon as you get to the kitchen. You only get to keep listening to it so long as you are in the kitchen doing the cleaning thing, and you have to turn it off when you're done. Well, you're far more likely, if you haven't finished, say, your episode of the podcast the next day, to get up and go do your dishes. And yeah, that takes a little bit of discipline. It takes a little bit of work. But if you're determined to change that part of your life, these are ways you can hijack your nervous system in your favor by hijacking that interest-based nervous system. So I don't know how helpful that is for some of you. I actually highly recommend the channel How to ADHD for tips and stuff like this. I've watched her for a long time. She's on Twitter as well under How to ADHD. She's really, really good. She and her partner both have it, if I recall correctly. I highly, highly recommend checking out her content. She's all ADHD based, but as far as talking about my experiences and talking about kind of the ADHD autism thing, I think is something that I said I wanted to talk about a little bit as well, but I think I touched on it. I I am getting fairly close to when my meds usually kick out. So, do you guys have any more questions that I haven't already answered in the stream? Or would you guys like me to kind of start to wrap up? That's kind of where I'm at the moment as far as focus goes. Some of this stuff is a little bit rough to talk about. Oh, could I also talk about the connection between PTSD and ADHD? So, those of us with PTSD are more likely to have anxiety. Those of us with anxiety are more likely to develop PTSD. Those of us who have ADHD are also more likely to end up in abusive relationships because we're also, as I said before, impulsivity paired with deep emotional connection. Like when I meet somebody who I get close to, we can end up either I have to be very, 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 very cautious, very consciously, or we can end up best friends overnight. Especially if that other person is on the spectrum or has ADHD themselves. I have to be very guarded about that. And I have to be very protective over who I trust, which makes me come off as a much more reserved person than I am. I have this dual reputation of being either far more reserved than I am or far, far more open than I am. And depending on how well you've gotten to know me, you'll think I'm one or the other. When in reality, in public, I'm far more reserved than I come off like I am. And when I'm close with friends, I'm probably far more open than they think I am too. But with that, you can end up traumatized repeatedly because you can end up in bad relationships. Often parents can be rather abusive because they don't necessarily know your diagnosis or how to handle treating it. You can end up over-medicated. We are far more likely to end up addicted as well. Those of us who have ADHD and or are on the spectrum. These are all things that can end up with traumatic experiences. We're far more likely to end up homeless than the general population. So because of that and the fact that we are also more likely to develop anxiety at a pretty young age, we're far more likely to end up developing PTSD, and it can be harder to treat because a lot of the things that can help you treat PTSD are going to be a lot harder if you can't focus very well. Sam Chaos, yes, I do find it easier to do things when I've got somebody doing it with me. In fact, I have a group of friends that it's kind of a close thing, but we do accountability stuff together. So when I started trying to work out, I have a friend that I call in the morning or that texts me in the morning, and we work out together because right now I'm struggling with that. I got stuck in bed for a long period of time. So I had a really hard time motivating myself to start working out in the morning, and having that friend call me and having us work out together and sometimes even worship together helped a lot. So yeah, accountability is big. And if you have a friend who can do things with you, either physically or even over the phone, that can help a lot because now you have that extra socialization component that can engage that interest-based nervous system. Because again, with ADHD especially, interest-based nervous system, anything you can do to make yourself more interested in the task, knitting together, sewing together, doing dishes while listening to your favorite podcast and only listening to that podcast when you're doing the dishes, or working out together and getting to socialize with a friend. All of these things can hijack that nervous system to get you to take the next step. Do I think that it's appropriate to consider exercise as a form of ritual? No, actually not at all. Various ordinary events can be devotional to the gods. I actually talk about that in the video that's going to be coming out hopefully on Saturday, maybe as late as Sunday. I'm hoping to get it out Saturday, and I'm hoping patrons will have it tomorrow. But I talk about devotional acts as even potential offerings of a sort, as a way to keep your religion on the forefront of your mind, even if you have to be in the broom closet still. So yeah, absolutely. It's not silly. If exercise and self-care is a way for you to connect with the gods, that's between you and them. Especially people who have Hades as a patron often see exercise as a devotional act, or some folks with Hermes as patrons often will see athletics as being devotional to him. I knit as a devotional act to Athena. It doesn't mean everything I make is an offering to her, but it is a devotional act that helps me connect with her. So let's see, Asha, you know what? Awesome on you for knitting right now. I was knitting earlier today. Yeah, Midnight Mist, being too open or too reserved, a lot of us have a tendency to just like spill our guts as soon as we meet people, and that's something that you really have to like protect yourself from. Like I almost do end up over reserved with people because I've had so many bad experiences with oversharing. Yeah, Merocat, a secular ritual. Yeah, because ritual is just a repeated behavior, right? You can make it a sacred ritual, but like if you already have this habit or you're trying to build it, connecting it to your spirituality, if you have one, can be a really powerful tool for helping to make it a habit. Aya, I see a lot of self-care as devotional to Mars, seeing as it takes a lot of strength to even shower on some days. To me, it's a devotional act to him. Good for you. That's awesome. Like connecting those things to something important is, again, that's one of those ways that you can hijack your own nervous system in your favor. That's the key with ADHD. Make it interesting, make it important, make it engaging. Find some way to get yourself excited to do the things that are normally hard. And that's how you can accomplish incredible things. Because if you get enraptured in that podcast that you love while you're doing the dishes, you might end up cleaning the counters and the stove and the floors and everything else. And now you've got a fully clean kitchen when you felt like overwhelmed before. You might stay on the treadmill an extra 20 minutes to finish the episode of Lucifer. You know, you're like when you're done with your shower, you might end up noticing that you need to clean the toilet afterward. The point is, once you start, it's a lot easier to continue than it is to start in the first place. Inertia is the most powerful force in the universe, and overcoming it when you have ADHD is tough because your brain doesn't work the way everybody else's does. But if you can hijack your nervous system like that, if you can engage that excitement, that passion that you have, that overwhelming, incredible creative drive that we have, if you can do that, then once you overcome that inertia, it is incredible how much you can do. It really is. I've been shocked at how fast I've become successful as an author, how rapidly this channel is growing. That's not bragging. It's actually bewilderment, to be honest. And a lot of that has been basically both lucking into a career that I'm deeply interested in, but also learning how to hijack my own nervous system in my favor. And again, at this point, I'm pretty okay with my disorder, but other people don't like it too much. That's a pretty good way to sum it up. But if you're struggling, I feel you. I bleed for you. That was me a few years ago. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. And if you learn yourself what you get excited about, what you love, if you find ways to incorporate that into the things that you need to do that you might have a hard time getting done, then your whole world will open up and change. Not overnight, because it's a skill you have to learn, because you need to learn yourself, and you need to accept that maybe the just do it, like, who was it that did that? I'm trying to remember his name. The just do it mentality doesn't necessarily work. That a lot of the stuff that neurotypical people might recommend to you doesn't necessarily work. But if you research ADHD, you read ADHD blogs, some things from Attitude Mag is hit or miss. Books on ADHD that are written by people with ADHD. If you do a bit of research and you learn yourself how to hijack your own interest-based nervous system, your life will change. Over time. And yeah, patience is not exactly the greatest virtue for a lot of us, let's face it, but it will. And that's incredible. Shia LaBeouf. Thank you, Victor. So I hope that helps. I am wondering if you guys want any more tips or anything, or any more coping mechanisms, or if you have any more questions. But this is my experience with ADHD, and discover kind of how to hijack my own nervous system to get a lot of the things that I struggled with done regardless. It's been a journey for me, and although I'm not a specialist, I'm not a life coach, I'm not in any way, like, apart from your guys' lovely willing super chats and whatever tiny portion of income like YouTube decides to share with me for the ads on this video. If this video is even allowed to have ads, like mental health stuff generally gets demonetized, like, let's face it. I'm not really profiting directly in any substantial way off of this. This is very personal, but I also don't want any of you to feel like you're alone, because I know what that's like, and it hurts. I was alone for most of my life, And now I'm in this incredible community with people that are like me, many of whom are struggling. And if anything that I said tonight can help you even a little bit, if anything that I've suggested from my own experience, from things that I've tried, and again, go check out those blogs. Like the ADHD Nerd is an excellent blog. Like I actually got to know him a little bit. His work is phenomenal. You know, if you're struggling in your marriage, there's like financial stuff with impulsivity that has come up between me and my partners. That like the ADHD Marriage is another excellent book that can help you navigate that if you're married to a neurotypical partner and you have it. You know, if you think you have it and you're struggling to find a psychiatrist, you know, call your insurance company and see if you can find one that specializes. Like if any of those tips that I'm giving you, if anything that I've said tonight changes something for you or helps you even a little bit, that's literally why I wanted to do this stream. And that's why I asked you guys if you wanted it. Because even though I might make a little tiny bit of profit off of this, that's really not what it's about for me. My channel's not big enough for this to be any sort of real income driver. I want to help because I know what it's like to be alone. I know what it's like to hate myself and to feel like there's something fucking wrong with me. When in reality, I'm just different and I needed to learn how to be me instead of trying to be neurotypical like everyone around me demanded my entire life. Because I can't snap my brain into having more dense prefrontal cortex matter and more dopamine receptors, but I can learn what it takes for me to accomplish the things that are important to me in my own life. Odd Little Sea Dragon, any good resources to give to neurotypical people on how to understand with people with ADHD a little better? Attitude Mag is extremely helpful. Again, they're kind of hit or miss with certain things. They have a tendency to function as an advertiser at times as much as anything else. But I highly suggest if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody who doesn't have ADHD, try picking up a book even at your library on ADHD that's written by somebody who has it. There's a couple that I can think of right off the top of my head. Nothing by the Amen clinics. Like they can go fuck themselves. Like they're an entirely profit-driven thing. But like the ADHD Marriage, again, for advice to partners with people with ADHD, the ADHD Marriage will open your eyes about some of the things that we are dealing with. And it's addressed to the neurotypical partner in some places and to the ADHD partner in others. So it's something you guys can work through together that can help. But be understanding. And don't expect your partner to just magically have their brain work the way that yours does. Understand that they might have a different solution to leaving the keys everywhere around the house than you do. That maybe setting up a hook might not be the best thing for them. So, like, things like that. Don't expect your partner to be neurotypical. Be understanding and try to learn as much as you can about the condition directly from people who have it, because that will help so much. Also, again, check out How to ADHD's channel. She talks extensively about the struggles that those of us with ADHD face, and it might help you kind of understand why maybe doing the dishes that morning, like I keep coming back to that because I fucking hate them, but like doing the dishes might have been like climbing to the top of a fucking mountain for your partner that day. Good chances asking in forums and support groups. Let's see. My fiance and I are both neurodivergent, but our struggles are quite different most of the time. Yeah, that's the case for me and my partner with ADHD. He's got primarily a hyperactive subtype. Mine is combined, but I lean a little bit inattentive. So I tend to be the spacey, daydreamy, getting lost in my head and hyper-focusing on everything, whereas he tends to be the fidgety, I can't focus on anything but video games ever type. And so we have a lot of similar things in like the way that our brains work, but we also have very different things in terms of our individual struggles. And that can be enlightening. Sometimes as somebody who's neurodivergent, your partner might need a different bit of support than you. And communication is going to be so important for that, and understanding, because just because you have the same condition doesn't mean it necessarily manifests at the same time. So, I think that's probably going to be a wrap up. Carbuckle, I don't know if there's a How to Autism channel, but I know that there are some good autism resource channels. You might want to Look for own resources from like autistic run charities and such, like own voices type charities. Some of them have good resources, and some of them also recommend like YouTube channels and the like. I've never had to research autism on YouTube, so I can't necessarily give you a recommendation. How to ADHD, I just happened to be lucky enough to stumble across. But there are several like autism awareness and coping channels that I know of that exist. I just don't know which ones I would recommend because I don't necessarily watch them. Yeah, I agree with Midnight Mist, by the way. Autism Speak is not an own voice charity. That's part of the reason why I said make sure they are like run by folks on the spectrum. Because Autism Speaks is not, and often like villainizes autism and has done some very hurtful things that have like heavily armed the autistic community. So I recommend completely against them. This channel does not endorse Autism Speaks, but there are other charities that actually are run by people on the spectrum that might be able to give you some better ideas as to what good resources would be. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up the stream for the night. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. This was a really personal stream. You guys kind of had to sit around with me rambling about how hard my life has been in a lot of ways, and thank you for listening to me whinge. But I hope that for those of you who might think that you're either on the spectrum or might have ADHD, for those of you who might be struggling with some of these things, if at least one thing helped you in some way from this, or if you have more suggestions for other people who might be struggling, I know that once this live stream closes down, it's probably going to try to auto put you onto another one, but try to hit that cancel button before it does. Drop down into the comments and let me know what tip or trick or thing that you related to that helped, or if you have something that you think that somebody else that I didn't say, that you think that somebody else might find helpful. Please put that in the comments. And for those of you that are struggling, if you made it to the end of this stream, which I kept a little bit on the shorter side to make sure that folks who might need to watch it can, check out the comments, read through them, see what other people have said. I know that that's a little bit of work, and I know that it can be a pain, and that this is going to be a VOD and everything else, but I want, like, reciprocity is not just between me and you, it's between you guys and each other, and this is a community, and it's important. And you don't know if something that you find useful could be the thing that inspires someone else. That's part of why I did this stream, to talk about my own life and the struggles that I have. The things that I've done may not work for you completely, but they're a place to start. And I would love to see those of you who have found ways to cope, who have found ways to get things done. I would love to see you guys help each other too. So please leave some of that in the comments. Please let me know if something that I said helped you. And remember, as I say at the end of every one of my videos, we're stronger together.